My name's Liz Carlston. I was a 17-year-old junior at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado on April 20th, 1999. I currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and work in marketing. On April 20th, I was in my math class with about 20 other students. We had a substitute that day, and I recall that the fire alarm went off, and it was alarming because usually they'll tell us if we had a test or a drill the day before, but we didn't have any warning. So I remember standing up and looking out the window and seeing kids run down the hill and jumping over the fence. And it was strange because they were not orderly. Usually with a fire drill, you just kind of line up and you walk and it's all calm and collected, but that wasn't what I saw out the window. So we left the classroom, and I recall a teacher to my left crying and turning right, went down the hallway out through a large door and down the staircase. And I had a history teacher that was stopping traffic, and we crossed the street. We gathered in the park across the street from the school, and there we waited. I recall just a lot of friends, a lot of classmates running up and telling all kinds of stories. There's guys with paintball guns, there's construction going on, they're shooting all the seminary students, they're shooting all the athletes, all the people with white hats, and it was so out of context it didn't make sense. So I remember just grabbing a friend, and we went and sat on a picnic bench on the back of the park and just waited. And pretty soon a mob of people came running at us. And what had happened after the fact, what we learned is some of the gunmen had shot out the window in our direction. We weren't in any harm, but that's what triggered the mass of people to come running at us. So we got up, and I remember that it just didn't make sense. I just laughed with my friend as we ran away because it was so out of context. But that day I was really worried about my sister because I hadn't heard from her. I was worried about friends. I was worried about teachers, classmates. I just didn't have a read on where anybody was. So we were shepherded over to the elementary school nearby, and they kept us in a gymnasium, and we had to have a parent sign us out. And it was just this chaotic scene, and I remember a friend's parent checked me out as her kid, which I was grateful for, because then I could go outside. And they had lists of names that they would publish. So there were 2 check-in points, the elementary school and the public library. And so people that were checked in at the library, I could go and review that list, and I didn't see my sister's name. Eventually my mom came, and my dad was sent over to the public library, and so we just waited until we heard from my sister, and it was several hours later where Mom came over and said we got her. And so we could head home, and I just remember it was just a very emotional day because you just didn't know where family was, and you didn't know what was happening with friends, classmates, or teachers. So all in all, I didn't see a lot of the physical violence that day, but I had loved ones that were in the middle of it and in a lot of danger, and that's always been hard. I had a basketball coach. He was the teacher that was killed, and I remember bringing a teammate over to meet with his widow and his family, just to show them that he mattered, that we knew him, that he was loved. And those were just hard times. We didn't know what to say, but we just showed up, and often just being there with somebody was enough, just to show that you loved them, you cared for them. You can't take the pain away, but just showing up and being present is often the best thing you can do for others that suffer through an event like that. I think in terms of some of the triggers or things that I had to pay attention to, just that need for news to understand what happened. We would turn on the television and watch the news, and that's where we got the information. And it was surreal because I'd see classmates telling me the news, telling me what happened, and I didn't necessarily trust their character. That made me question what I was hearing and whether that story was authentic or not. But often with the news, we'd start to hear the same thing over and over again, and you'd see the same images, and they're frankly very traumatic images and very traumatic sounds and sights. And so to be exposed to that over and over again we didn't realize the harm that was being done by that you're essentially re-traumatizing yourself with every viewing. And what I learned from that is when other episodes like this happen, that's a trigger for me with the news. So not to be consumed by it, not to be spending all my time with watching an event unfold and the coverage thereafter. I do need to, when episodes happen, I do need to understand what happened, some of the details, but I don't need to understand all the details, because then that just harbors up triggers and that PTSD element. So I just try to avoid watching the news is a big one. I remember after the event, it was a time for our family to be together, and it was an interesting time because we were grateful that we survived. My sister and my parents, and my brother was away on a service mission for his church, and my sister and I, we just were left to process what we'd seen. She was in a really terrible situation that day, where she was trapped in a classroom with my basketball coach who had been shot, and really traumatic experiences. And so our family was trying to help process that episode. And I recall moments where I was a dumb teenager, just not really understanding the depth of how traumatic and hard that was. So often I would try to make light of it, make a joke of it, laugh it off. And I don't know, I think sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just be there and listen. Don't try to solve it. Don't try to fix it. Just listen. And so that was a lot of our time trying to recover, just trying to understand life had just been shattered. How do you rebuild it? And coming to the realization as you're trying to put these pieces back together, you can't. You need to start over and have a new normal. And so rebuilding that was a process for us. And it was a multi-year journey. It was one with lots of layers, lots of wrinkles, where spikes in emotional health would come into play. That was a dynamic we didn't have to address before. PTSD, bipolar was introduced. There were just these elements that we didn't know how to deal with, and so we had to learn how to deal with that and how to learn how to support and love each other through that. And it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't a perfect experience, but we all did the best we could. And I feel like today we're in a good spot. I don't feel like we're in the best spot still, but I feel like we're in a good spot where we understand it's the incident that happened to us and some of those personal struggles we just had to learn how to overcome with that dynamic of trauma layered over growing up, layered over, life goes on and figuring out what life is all about anyway. So not an easy experience or flawless one, but one that you just, you walk the journey and you figure it out. I recall 2 episodes that were really helpful for us. I'll call the first a celebrity impact. So we had the Denver Broncos, we had Garth Brooks, we had Celine Dion, we had Shania Twain. I mean, any celebrity that was in town for an event, they made a point to come by and say hi to our classmates. And that was just cool because it meant the world was watching and that the world cared. That was symbolic of that. In addition to the letters and the cards that the world had sent to us, expressing their condolences, expressing their sadness, wanting to connect, wanting to lift us. That was hugely impactful, that we had a community, a global community that cared about what happened to us, so that we know it wasn't totally irrelevant. And the other one was a visitor from, she had been a survivor of the Holocaust, and she came and shared her story. And I recall that a student had asked her, how does the Holocaust compare to Columbine? It doesn't, how do you understand what we're going through? And I look back at that with a bit of awe, that the audacity that a classmate would ask a Holocaust survivor, how does this compare? But Gerda Weissman-Klein was her name, and she said, pain is pain. I can understand what your pain means and how do you process it. And I want to share my pain so that you can see you can come through the other end, that light can push out the darkness. And so she was a living, breathing example for us, that we could choose to persevere and choose to overcome the darkness, to find other productive ways to face what at the time had felt like a very bleak future. She helped us hold up a light to say you can push through this and still have a very joy-filled life. My process toward healing, it really took a lot of time, and it was an interesting one. I look at about a 10-year window where I thought, I'm not angry, I'm good. I didn't see anything that was really bad. I'm okay. My sister saw bad things, but I didn't, so I'm okay. And that attitude, frankly, was a huge disservice to myself, because what that really meant, I was holding on to some anger and to some unaddressed issues that a harm had been done to my family. And I looked at that individually rather than collectively for my family. And so there were some elements that I just had to process and heal from. And it's interesting with trauma, there's just layers, things that you think that you've processed, you've dealt with, but they come back, or they come back in different ways, different forms. And I recall I was away at college a couple of years after the shooting, and we had a speaker. He had been a veteran of the Vietnam War. And he talked about how he tried to reach out to some of his Army buddies and reconnect with them. That he was, the war didn't impact him anymore, and he's reaching out to his friends, and they wouldn't return his call. And that was a hurt to him, and he's thinking, what, how, let's be friends again. And his advice was he started to write all his thoughts and feelings and emotions down on paper. And he just filled up journals of just thoughts and feelings from how he experienced the war. And he said that once it was trapped on paper and he could put it in a book and put it on a shelf, those thoughts and feelings could no longer haunt him. That he could kind of reframe his life and his thought process where he could be productive. And that was a really helpful thing for me to emulate, because part of the experience of going through a tragedy, you want it to mean something. You want it not to have happened in vain. And when I would write, I would try to, my first approach was the historical record, just to make sure I had all the details right. I wanted it to be accurate. And so that was the first layer of writing for me. But then I had other writings where I'd have different, there's people So I know that there was unfortunately, people dealing with it in an unhealthy way. There were suicides that came from the event. There were people that turned to drug use. There were people that just did self-destructive behaviors. And that would affect me. So I would write down how I felt emotionally when those kind of things happened. So the writing really was a way just to capture all those thoughts that were random, that were out of control, and I could just start to tether them down. And that way, that allowed me to feel like I was in control again. It allowed me to feel like I could be empowered, that I could kind of take ownership of the situation. Again, with Columbine, it creates so many ripples and things you just don't anticipate. With feelings of fear, feelings of not being safe, being irrationally angry, being irrationally emotional, where you just start to cry for no reason at all, and you think, I'm so broken. What is going on? And these are just, frankly, we are human. We have emotions, we have feelings, and when you have a jarring trauma, it just changes your normal, your day to day, and you have to figure that out again. And so for me, writing was a very helpful exercise to help get it on paper so that it couldn't haunt me, so that I could choose different ways to react and that were healthy approaches to life. So I think that was a really important component of my healing process. I remember in the days after, at our church, we had the Linus Project come, and what that entailed was they would at our church, they had facilitated these support groups where all of us Columbine kids would get in a room, and 8 of us would be in a circle, and we'd talk about what we'd seen, what we'd experienced. Very difficult moments just to share the unspeakable with each other, just to understand what each other had experienced. And so very emotionally hard, heavy
sessions that we went through. And after the first session, I remember leaving the room, and there was a lady with a blankie that she handed to us, and she was with the Linus Project, which they provide comfort quilts for trauma survivors. And I remember as a teenager, I would go everywhere with my blankie because it was a source of comfort. It was just like Linus from Charles Schulz's Peanuts cartoon. It was a tangible thing that we could feel of love and support for us. And as the days progressed, we started to tie and make more blankets for our classmates. And then that grew into sending blankets away to other people in need across the country. And that was a really cool healing act of service that we could do. And it taught me that one of the best antidotes for fear and for anger is kindness and service. And that really helps you heal. When you get outside of yourself, outside of that pain, kindness and service really went out in bringing back love, bringing back peace, bringing back confidence to face your day-to-day. For people that are just experiencing trauma for the first time or experiencing a new traumatic episode, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is give yourself permission to feel whatever you need to feel. It is okay. I think the next most important thing is it is okay. I know it feels like it's messed up, that the worst thing ever happened to you, and that is absolutely true, but it's okay. And you can process that however you need to. If you need to pick up a pillow and punch it, if you need to cry, if you need to go and just talk to a friend, talk, that helps to process, that helps to get it out. If you don't feel like talking, if you feel like being on your own and listening to a song over and over and over again, just to kind of escape the emotion, do that. Do that for a time. Put a time box on it. Make it a week, make it 2 weeks. Make sure that at the end of that time that you need to feel that emotion, whatever that emotion is, make sure that you replace that you choose a better part. One of the things that I observed is with Columbine, it became very clear that there were two paths. People that were able to kind of progress and pull out of the grief and the pain of that. They just chose happiness. They chose to serve. They chose to be kind. They chose joy. They just chose to put themselves in situations where they could feel good again. And others would just kind of wallow and stay in that angry, sad, fearful place. So with trauma, you really do have two choices. You can choose joy or you can choose to stay. You can choose to progress. You can choose to be angry. And both, you are completely within your right. You are very much entitled. You can, again, feel whatever you need to and want to feel. But know there are consequences too. And that there are some behaviors that are more helpful than others to help you find joy and help you reclaim your life. And that's an important distinction that every survivor of trauma needs to keep in mind, that they get to reclaim and they get to build again. And that's frankly a very empowering, resilient outcome of tragedy. And it's one of the better parts of a bad episode. If I could go back and talk to 17-year-old Liz, I would tell her to say sorry. I would tell her to swallow your pride and say sorry. And what I mean by that is the night before the shooting, we had an open gym. And it was a time with preparing for the summer league. So we just finished our basketball season. I was on the varsity team. And we were just getting ready for the summer just to get better, to improve. I'd be entering my senior year of basketball. And we had just completed our first winning season in 12 years. So we were on a good path. But I had had a disagreement with the coach. And I remember that open gym, I didn't ever reconcile that. I just went to, at the end of the practice, I went to the baseline, I changed my shoes. And I had a feeling, go apologize to your coach. But I didn't. I ignored it. I just walked out. And the next day he was killed. And that was a part of grief. I had to hold on to that. I had to process that. And I had to feel the pain of that. Feel the grief of not being able to apologize, not being able to say goodbye. What do you do with that? So if I could go back in time to 17-year-old Liz, I'd say you're sorry. And that's a way that I live my life now, that I make amends quickly, that I don't hold on to grudges, that I don't hold on to disagreements, or I don't cause disagreements with others. I try not to. That happens sometimes day to day. But when they do happen, apologize quickly to reconcile it. Because the pain of holding on to that, of not being able to apologize, not being able to say goodbye, is not an easy burden. So as a family member of someone that has suffered from a tragedy, from trauma, I would suggest that the best approach is to listen, to love unconditionally, and to just be patient, to be supportive, and to let go of any, sometimes we have the tendency to feel like, oh, I need to be right, I need to counsel, I need to coach, especially for a younger sibling or for a parent to child, whatever that dynamic. Usually the older person feels some kind of responsibility and duty to keep the younger one on track. And when trauma or tragedy happens, you really can't control those emotions. And so the best thing to do is to listen, to be present, to love unconditionally, and to let them know that they're safe, that they are wanted, that they are needed. And you do that by just being present and not coaching, not talking at them, but listening and helping process together what they had experienced. I remember for Columbine, we had our aunt in Wyoming, and she made a point to call us every night. And at some points I thought, I've already told you my story 10 times. There's nothing to say to you. I thought in my head, but etiquette warrants like, oh, hi Aunt Karen, how are you doing? Let me tell you this again. And what that did for us, it just showed us that she loved us. It helped us to tell our story. And that was a really important thing regardless. With trauma, you just have to talk, get it out. It really is a way to process it. By vocalizing it, it can't hurt you anymore, because it's with every retelling, you're able to process it that much more. You're able to understand the unthinkable, so that at some point you can say, oh, I can set that down and feel good about that, and walk away and keep moving, and not let that be baggage for my life anymore.